Okay, welcome. We're back.
The official beginning, really.
Now we're recording, so the people who are not here can watch later. Sarah and I did an online class this year called Fringeless, and we had so much fun and had so many people also having so much fun weaving in it that we wanted to do a live event. And since I live in Colorado and she does not, we are doing it online. So I'm coming to you from Fort Collins, Colorado.
And I am in Moscow, Idaho.
And amazing what the internet can do, right?
And you are here with us, which is kind of incredible.
It's amazing. So yes, there's some little buttons on the bottom of your screen. Actually, let me just do a couple quick housekeeping things. And then we'll get into all the stuff we want to talk about. So this is me and Sarah when we were working on the class, and we had way too much fun with that. If I can run my little tech thing here. Hold on. Okay. So we had a thing about dogs because I posted a picture of my dead dog on the Facebook machine recently. So Sarah sent me this picture of her dead dog, Jane, who she wove. And this is my dog, Cassie, under my loom. And then there is dear Sirius, who was part of our filming of the class. And he has also passed on now, I believe. Last June, I'm sure Sarah misses him a lot. He's a sweetheart. So a few housekeeping things. The chat feature is turned off. You may not even see a chat button on your thing. That's because it gets a little busy to have people chatting about other things on the side. But there is a Q&A button, which you should see at the bottom of your screen. And if you have questions during the event, please just type them in there, and we'll try to get to as many of them as we can. This is recorded, as I said earlier, and we'll send you all an email link to it about 24 hours later, sometime tomorrow. We're going to try to keep this to an hour, so we might not get to all of your questions, but remember that you can ask questions in the Fringeless class if you're there, and your fellow people will see your questions and help you out. And if Sarah and I see a lot of questions about the same thing, of course, we're going to make new content for the class. So there's always that also. Let us know what you're confused about. And maybe we'll do this again soon, and you can ask more questions then. So if you're new to our Tapestry world, you might not know that Sarah and I produced this particular class that's on the screen now. It's called Fringeless, and for Salvage Warping with Sarah Swett. So Sarah goes through and teaches how to do this for salvage warping thing. And we're going to talk about what that is in just a second. And you can find it on my website, RebeccaMezoff.com/fringeless. Okay, so what about, here's a quick, I'm just playing with with this technology now. Here's a quick poll. How many of you are already enrolled in the Fringeless online class? I'm just going to give you a few seconds to answer.
Says I can't vote.
And I'm sorry, Sarah, you can't vote, but you are enrolled.
I guess I am in the class. Good.
Yeah, so just that poll should have popped up for you. Just click yes or no if you're already enrolled in the class. It's just to give us an idea of how many of you are already a little more familiar with for salvage warping or not. Okay, so I'm going to end that, and it looks like about, let's see, I'm going to share the results. Hopefully you all can see that. 68% of you are not, and 30% of you are. So, well, that's super fun.
Yeah.
Okay. I'm new to Zoom, the Zoom webinar, so that was just, thanks for indulging me there. Okay, so let's start right off by talking a little bit about what for salvage warping is. I'm going to give you a quick overview, and then the master Sarah is going to fill in.
We might say that's because Rebecca is the expert teacher and I'm the expert waver of arms. So
Well,
we make it nice and crisp at the beginning, and that's important.
okay, well, I'm going to share the screen again just so I can show you a few slides. And what is for salvage warping? This is a lovely drawing that Sarah made. And we'll talk about this more later. But while we're here, notice that the warps are in pairs. That will be important later. So I actually learned about forced salvage warping from Sarah. I learned about it from a blog post that she did a year or two ago, right?
2016, I think, almost. So it must have been 2 years ago.
Okay, wow. Maybe. Anyway, she wrote a great blog post about it, and I tried to figure it out, and I did a fair job, but boy, I had a few issues. So she definitely got me straight on how to do it, especially in the course of doing this online course. Sarah learned it from Susan Martin Maffei, and then some modifications from Michael Rohde, I think. Is that right?
Yep.
Okay.
Exactly.
So these are looms that you might use for forced salvage warping. We can talk more about looms later, but there are a lot of different options there. Here's some of the ones we've used. The one on the left is one of Sarah's pipe looms with some smaller versions down below. The one on the right is an example of using a Murex loom for a forced salvage technique. And let me just show you what it looks like to set it up, give you some sort of idea of how it works. So this is a pipe loom here. And basically what happens is you create a tapestry warp in the middle. That's the part you're going to weave on. And then you create a supplemental warp at the bottom, and this one is in. And then we're going to have another supplemental warp at the top, and there's a picture of the whole thing. So basically you're using a jig to create a warp you're going to weave on, and then you're holding that warp in place with a bottom supplemental and a top supplemental warp, and then you'll take out that jig. And so here she's weaving on that warp. This, I think maybe it was that warp. Anyway, this little piece, and she'll weave from here to here. But the trick about this thing is that she'll have a shed the whole way. It won't, and the warp doesn't end here. So here's just a couple more images. There's that piece on the loom woven almost all the way to the end. And here is it taken off the loom. And I realized I took the picture with it flipped over. So this is the back of the piece on the right. And another little piece that Sarah wove on a pipe loom, which was beautiful. I think she had this one done when I showed up at her studio to film the class, and I thought it was marvelous. So here's a few little examples of what Sarah's been doing, and I'm going to let her tell you about these little pieces.
Later or now?
So Sarah, why don't you give us a little bit more about forced salvage warping and tell us why we would do it. What are the benefits of using forced salvage warping?
Well, the simplest one is that there's almost no finish work. There's a little bit of setup. There is this technique, which is what our entire class is about, actually, is setting it up so that your warp is square and even and all the stuff that it's supposed to be. But the main deal is that when you take this tapestry, which runs from here to here, when I would finish weaving this, when you take it off the loom, there's just a tapestry. There's no fringe at the top. There's none at the bottom. There's just two little strings that hang down that you can weave in, which means that it's this little contained unit. It means there's no thrums. So if you're using hand spun, for instance, you don't have to cut your thrums off. It also means there's no hems. And for me, this is particularly important because I weave all my ends in as I go, and Rebecca needles all hers in so that the front and the back, actually, you can't always tell which is which means it's possible to hang them out in midair and they're without saying, oh yes, well, here's the folded over part because that's the hem, to try to hide the fringe. It means that the supplemental piece, the part that would be thrums, is actually reusable. So there's absolutely no waste. And again, if you're using hand spun work, which I often am, that's just a wonderful thing because you get really protective of your hand spun warp. Another thing, just sort of psychologically, is that it makes this really defined, clean thing of experiments. And I find, I've been doing a lot of experiments recently, which we'll talk about in a bit, but each one, even if it's just a little color value study, becomes a kind of precious object. And I think our experiments are worthy of that kind of attention. And sometimes if it's just an experiment, I'll just cut it off the loom and throw it in a pile. And that feels a little sad, whereas each one of our experiments, our ideas are worthy of attention. And somehow this gives us a defined space to explore a particular idea and then be done, and then say, look at this little thing where I was messing around with a different kind of weft or something like that. And so it's almost a psychological thing for me as much as the physicality of the object. That
beautiful. That is beautiful. Okay, I am so distractible. I'm reading the questions while I'm listening to Sarah. So it's a good thing she is telling you. I did just get a message from someone that for some reason Zoom is limiting the number of people to 100. And I'm totally sorry. We're supposed to be able to have 10,000 people on here. I'm so sorry. I don't know what happened with that. If you're on, congratulations, you were in the first 100. If you have friends who are asking you about it, they can actually use the phone number on the registration to call in, and they can listen to it, and there will be a recording. I'm so sorry. And I can't figure out how to fix it. So I will have to find out what happened, and we will do another one of these soon. Yeah. So anyway, let's move on because you guys are here. And Sarah, can you tell us a little bit about your history with this technique, and tell me if you want me to put up some slides?
Yeah, well, actually, you could start with that one of Jane's picnic if you want, okay. Which is the tapestry that's right behind me. It's hanging up here. It's a tapestry I wove in about 2000. That's some of the little teeny experiments I was doing that you're seeing right now, which. But this, yes. So this in effect was a much larger experiment that I did about 18 years ago. When I was thinking a lot about the nature of tapestry, I've been weaving for about 10 years, a lot of really, really big work. And I was spinning all the warp and I was spinning all my weft. And I kept thinking about what is it that tapestry can do that nothing else can do, and how do we celebrate those things that tapestry can do? And one of the things that tapestry has is the warp. And so at first it was just, well, I spun all this warp, I want people to see it. And then I started thinking about textiles and the nature of textiles and how essential they are. So I designed this particular series here, the Jane's Picnic series that you can see, imagining the whole world as a carpet, and the world happened on the carpet. So there's a series of 4 of them: eat, drink, toast marshmallows, and do the dishes in the morning. And do the dishes in the morning actually has the dogs licking the plates. So there are plates, and one of the plates where the dog has licked is open warp. So you can actually not only see the fringe itself, which is intrinsic to the carpet world, but also that little place where the warp was open. And that suddenly made me think, what could I do more of that? Here's a couple of details you can go ahead just to show. I think the next one shows the warp, the bottom warp, not the, so you can see the bottom warp where if this was a painting, you could paint the s'mores and you could paint the graham crackers, but to paint the fringe would be ridiculous. So it made me really happy to use a structure that could be nothing but tapestry. So the next couple are just details of the tapestry. So you can also see the difference between the work I was doing then, which was extremely pictorial, a lot of translucency, a lot of, can I weave fire? Can I weave a plastic bag? Can I weave chocolate? To what I'm doing now, which is still really based on the materials. So the next slide is the piece that I think I came to next. I was thinking about what happens if you show more warp. Is it possible to show more warp? And I had heard distantly about this for selvage technique from a friend, Pam, in Australia. And she had taken a class from Archie and Susan, and she gave me a brief description via an email. And this, of course, was even early days of email because it would have been early 2000s. And I sort of figured out what she was saying and made something up, which was really hard and quite unsatisfactory warping wise, but the structure just thrilled me because I was experimenting with several things. The idea of the forced selvage. I was actually doing some katazome printing. You can see there's color on the open warps. And I was, in fact, I was actually painting the open warp. So the open warps would show and have color on them. And then I could weave in sections over it. And the thing itself then, because of this forced selvage technique, would be defined. It would have a structure and it wouldn't just fall apart with all this warp that did not have some kind of a frame around it. So you can then show the next one. So I did this again. This time I wanted that forced selvage structure so that I could hold it together because I wanted the open warp in this case, which was acting as a warp. The other thing about forced selvage, which you can see in this one in particular, is that there are two different sets for those of you who are weavers. So the actual weaving, which is weaving the weaver, is woven at 16 ends to the inch. And I don't have a detail of this. This is my only slide, alas. And then the actual weaver is woven at 8 ends to the inch. So you can split the warp for parts of it, but that's a technicality.
That's very cool.
Later. But it is, again, both of these things were possible, both the physical structure and that held it all together because it was defined by the forced selvages. And then also the ability to split the warp. Also the physical person is wool, and the little tiny one, the woven one who's doing the weaving, who actually has a face, is silk. So it was an interesting, again, materials, always pushing the materials. But it was clear to me that I did not know what I was doing in terms of the warping. So when the opportunity came to take a class from Susan, I leapt at it and actually did something I'm not very good at doing, which is I flew to Mexico, where Archie and Susan had gone at Jean-Pierre and Gael's house, and I took a workshop there. So after that, I came back from that workshop just fired up about forced selvage. And if you go to the next one, for a while, I wasn't thinking about open warp or anything. I was just thinking about the warping structure.
Okay, so before I go,
yeah,
this is the part. Can you see my pointer?
I can. I don't know. Hopefully,
I think everybody can. This is the part that is 16, right? And
yeah.
And this part, all the rest of it was 8.
Yep.
Okay.
Yep.
Cool. Is this a PVC loom in the picture?
Yes, it is. Yes, it is a PVC loom because of the little strap. You can see the strap at the bottom.
Yeah.
So a lot of I weave a lot of meta tapestries. I think a lot of my work it's like my comics. But I wasn't drawing comics then. I was just weaving them.
Cool. Very cool. Okay.
This is just an example of this is 9 inches by 9 inches. And again, fire, because who doesn't want to try to weave fire? Well, maybe some people don't, but find it irresistible. But when I came back from that class, I just wanted to get the technique down. I wanted to put a warp on and get it off. So I chose a structure, in this case, 9 inches square. And I think I wove 20, 25 9-inch square tapestries in all sorts of ways. And I had not worked at that size. It seemed at that point very small to me because I was used to working 3, 4 feet, 5 feet, many, many more square feet anyway. And these I could do in a matter of days or weeks. So I just did a whole bunch of them, and some of them ended up turning into the book Casting Off, which we don't have a slide of, but Rebecca has them, and I have on my website on the archive section talks about that. So I just wove a whole bunch of them, and that made it just part of my repertoire, so that it was like, oh, of course, if I'm doing a small piece, I'm going to do it as forced selvage.
There's also a video of that Casting Off book in the Fringeless class.
Oh, right. Yeah, there is. So that's kind of cool because you can see the turning pages. And in fact, the next slide shows, I returned to both the book form and the open warp form. With this particular one, this slide and the next slide are both of a series or a book structure I called It's Raining, Said the Lady with the Alligator Purse. And so trying to use, you can see in some of this one, you can see the open warp then became the rain. And for some of them, it's just a few lines, a few drops. And then in this one piece, it's almost entirely open warp because it's pouring down, except, you know, all around her umbrella. So she is dry under her umbrella in her little yellow shoes. But again, so in this case, yeah, I had this very, very delicate structure, especially in this one on the right here. And having it be for selvage meant that it stayed together, and then I could sew it into this book form and also turn the pages so you can see it on both sides, which the slide doesn't show, but it shows the next page. I think the next slide is or it's 2 pages later. So I should have a slide of the 3D book, because then you can see light coming through the open warps. But eventually, of course, it stops raining and off she goes. But I find this structure just fascinating in the way that it kind of frees me up to take things off the wall, to put them in book structures, because without having a hem or without having any kind of bulk at the top and bottom, you end up with a defined piece that can do anything, I feel like. So anyway, there we are to kind of to the present.
Cool. Okay. Oh, I meant to take this. Sarah told me to take this out, but this is Sarah, and I forgot, sorry. This is Sarah weaving on a great big pipe loom. So this was a long time ago, right? Yeah,
this is the size work I was doing. I mean, off and on between the early fringed work, but you can see I definitely had shifted to a pipe loom. This actually would have been in the early 2000s, because I'm in my current studio, and
okay.
I early on wove with a big Shannock loom, and I had moved. I talked about that in the class. I think my move from the Shannock to the pipe loom. So I won't go into that, but this, yeah. So this is this other size I normally did, and how people's work evolves, both loom wise and imagery and size. I think the next slide is just this one finished, and then we can get back to the object at hand. This is not for selvage, but of course, I was seeking the finished work I do on my large tapestries makes it pretend to be for selvage. I actually don't like hem, so I do this whole other finish thing so that there is no hem. So the for selvage just makes sense to me anyway.
Cool. Actually, Linda asked how big a piece you can weave with the for selvage technique.
Well, the biggest one I have woven is, we talk about it again in the class. I have a picture of it. I wonder if I could turn my computer. I can't see what I can see, but if I turn my computer this way, can you see the,
yes.
Can you see it?
Way in the back, there's a white.
long, narrow piece.
Yep.
If I tilt it like that, maybe.
Yep.
It's one of the pieces from my rough copy series, and it's called The Receipt, and it is 24 inches wide and, oh gosh, 8 feet, 7 feet long, something like that. I sort of made up a technique for that, which is for selvage on a continuous warp, which someday maybe we'll do a webinar on, so that you can do really long, because it's ridiculous. I mean, you could figure it out, I'm sure, but it revolves a lot of sticks and a lot of straps, but it's perfectly doable. And if you had a fixed loom, a great big fixed loom, and were willing to climb up ladders to sit on it, sort of like Susan does, you could certainly do an enormous one. There's no reason not to.
Cool. Very, very cool. That's, yeah, we might have to do something about that.
Someday,
because, so what you're saying is you can make an enormous tapestry this way, but it's a little more complicated than what we teach in the class.
Yes, it is more complicated. Yeah, it is. But you can certainly size up the sorts of things we're showing here and that we're doing now is tiny. And the outside of a dog, the one with the first one I did, was 2 feet by 3 feet. And that wasn't bad at all. It was perfectly reasonable size.
Okay.
So
it's when it actually folds around the loom that it becomes a...
Right. And you have to advance the warp, and yeah.
Okay, so I know that, here's one more slide that you sent about, we're talking about materials.
Yeah, well, that's my yarn cabinet at a time when that was my yarn, a bunch of natural dyed yarn that I selected from, and how that has evolved and continues to evolve now until I actually just have a very small stash, except for the piles of dead leaves behind me, which you can see, which might be yarn one of these days or something.
Okay. I'm wondering about, I know that you've been doing some experimenting with those dead leaves and other things, and I'm wondering if you could talk a little bit about some of your experiments in general or experiments with materials.
I think that one of the, well, I don't know what that has to do with paying attention to the materials, I guess. It feels like there's always this reciprocal relationship, and that the process of learning anything, there's this beginning of, it all seems overwhelming. Oh my gosh, I want to try everything. And then picking one thing at a time. I mean, for me, initially it was tapestry. How do you weave a tapestry? How do you keep the edge, the selvedge square? How do you move wefts? How do you make colors? How do you blend things? And then from there to the structure. So all the open warp and messing around with that. And then using the same materials. And then going on for years thinking, of course, I'm a person who uses wool. And even last spring, when we did the workshop and the filming of the workshop, and about the same time, the American Tapestry Alliance, ATA, did a survey of all the weavers and said, well, what do you use for your weft? And I said, oh, wool, only wool, ever wool. And promptly, literally, weeks later, I was weaving with linen and tried spinning linen. And this fall now, I am weaving with dead leaves and paper. The thing behind me now is woven with let's see, this little house here is woven with a Staples receipt that I picked up on the ground when I was taking a walk the other day, and cut and spun into paper yarn that I wove into a tiny house. And this tiny house is woven with a used coffee filter. And so the tapestry you see now is woven with cordage made at the bottom, the cordage made with dead leaves, which here's some right here. And it's quite fascinating. I'm doing a lot of experiments with that. So I don't know very much. I'm just trying. I'm in the midst of trying it out. And then the rest of it, the little barn there is also an unspun piece of iris leaf. And then the rest of it is linen. This one, again, is the dead leaves, cordage for the body of it, and then some linen and some cotton. So I'm experimenting with the materials because suddenly the materials are just fascinating to me. And the work keeps getting simpler in a sense because I want to know what the materials can do. So I have no idea whether it will suddenly get more complex. But I did find that when Rebecca and I were filming the class, there's this video of both of us weaving on the same loom, and she's using a beater and butterflies, and I'm using a bobbin, and I may have made some comment about, well, I always use bobbins now. But here I am weaving with dead leaves, and they don't fit on my bobbin most of the time. So I'm actually using butterflies of the cordage, and I'm beating them in with a beater that I have not used in decades, but happened to make a long time ago in a workshop I took with Sarah Lamb about weaving pile. So you just never know what's going to happen or how it's going to lead you places.
Show that beater again now that it's bigger.
Okay. Let's see. Is it in focus?
Yeah.
I can't quite tell. So this is made out of a twisted piece of metal. I put wood over the top of it because I thought it was a fun idea. But the actual pieces of the beater are those metal corner pieces you'd put if you put pieces of wood, you're making a frame or something, and you can get these little metal, if you cut them right on the angle, you get two of these, and then you just screw them together with washers in between over this piece of steel. And I think this piece of steel, actually, it's just steel band. I think it just twisted. I mean, as I recall, I didn't heat it or do anything weird to it. I just kind of twisted it. And then, because I'm weird, carved the handle. So
lovely. Okay, so you're talking about how things change over time as you practice and experiment. So I love it.
Yeah. Well, that happens with you, Rebecca, isn't it? I mean, aren't you? Your work keeps evolving in not to dead leaves at this moment. You never know.
That's right.
Can you talk about that a little bit?
I can. Let me. Let's see if there's. There's a couple more of your dead leaf slides.
Oh, okay. There's finishing at the top of a 4 selvage tapestry. That's the little needle. And the moon, just so you know, is paper spun from my junk mail from a quarterly annuity annual report that makes very fine paper, it turns out. It's quite fun to spin. But that's the very top. You can see the supplemental warp at the top and locking in the regular warp there.
Okay. This is beautiful.
And that, again, you can see the join of the actual warp and the top supplemental warp there, and how my warps are not actually all that even at the top. You can see that there. I would love that to be a very smooth, straight line, but it's not. And I don't actually care. And it worked out fine. So for those of you who worry about that, don't.
A lot of that little variation just disappears once it comes off the loom.
It really does. But I just wanted you to see that so you don't fret.
Yes.
And there's just, messing with materials. I have no idea. Some wool, some dead leaves, some paper, just whatever happens to be there, because I was curious and I still am. Oh, and then the twisted warps.
Yes, and the twisted warps. One thing, Beth Gustafson asked if the finishing yarn was linen. I think she meant right here.
Oh, yes. Yeah, that would be, it probably was the same. That looks like hand-spun linen, and it's probably, it may be what I was using for the warp, or maybe I just used it for the last couple of rows there above the dead leaves, because I don't really know how the dead leaves behave. Right now I'm experimenting with them and sort of surrounding them with linen a little bit to protect them.
Cool. Okay, thanks. Beth likes to spin, and so I'm sure she wanted to know what that material was. Okay, so this is, there's a few slides here of how you sort of moved that experimentation into a project, and I think these slides are actually also coming later.
Yeah, I think you should. These cuffs that I've been making, again, taking cuffs and bracelets, again, something that's perfect for a 4 selvage structure, because you're just weaving a strip, and then you can either turn it into a bracelet that slides over, but because there's no finishing, there's no hem, you have this really clean little thing that you can actually wear. And I feel, again, getting tapestry off the loom out into the open is kind of fun. And why shouldn't we wear our tapestries? Why shouldn't they be?
That's right. So, show those 2 cuffs again now that the screen is bigger.
Oh, so here's one with dead leaves and linen. And this one, let's see if we can, this one I wrote.
Tapestry.
And here's another dead leaf and linen one. And then this one, this actually, I just finished yesterday. And the colored yarn actually was some yarn that a friend of mine spun and died just before she died. And I got it and have been wanting to use it specially. So now the yarn around it is some hand spun Shetland that I had. And there's this silk merino that Nancy spun and dyed, and then I could weave and now take with me places and having these little gems. And I think it's kind of again, a place if you're not feeling like, I don't feel like an artist today, but I do feel like a jewelry maker or a person who loves her friends and wants to bring them with her or him, you can.
Cool. So Sarah, actually, we did a little bonus for you about these cuffs. And so she did some, like a little instruction sheet about how to make them. And we'll give you that instruction sheet is in the Fringeless course, but we'll talk a little bit more about these cuffs in a couple minutes. A couple things we were talking about experimenting, and I just wanted to show you really quickly a couple things. I've been doing this tapestry diary that some of you have seen if you watch my blog. And this particular yarn was, so the store actually just did a blog post about this. I saw this yarn called Nightshades that's made by Harrisville Designs, and it wasn't out yet. It was last May. And I loved it because it was black with just a little bit of another color. And I thought I could make that. So I went home, I had a black fleece and I carded it with some various other colors of stuff. Let's see, to make these different, you can see in this picture, there's a green and a red and a yellow carded in with the black. And so that was just a fun way. There's the 5 different colors I made. A fun way to get an idea from somewhere and then make it. And so I used, obviously, for Salvage, warping for these little tapestry diary pieces. The whole thing with the like most of my work is large scale tapestry, not large scale, but they're 3 or 4 feet square. And I really like experimenting with color and yarn, but to put on a whole like 3 or 4 foot square tapestry and weave it all off, sometimes you need to do a little sampling first. And you need to make mistakes. I mean, really, you have to make mistakes to learn from. So these little tapestries were all about experimenting. And so I've been doing this little tapestry diary thing for a while now. And these were done all with hand spun, but I've done lots of them with other yarn. These also were hand spun. I think, hold on, let me show you. So like I used to do them little pieces, and I still do some like this. This is a little tiny piece that has fringe on it. And then this is one of the little pieces with no fringe. So the difference being aesthetic, and also when this one comes off the loom, it's finished. And that's super nice. Versus a lot of the ways I've taught, like in the Little Looms class, here's a piece from the Little Looms class, where I did a fringe kind of like this one, but then did a braid on the end to sort of neaten it up. But you can still see the warp at the edge. And then, of course, the other way, this is how I do my large tapestries at the moment, is a hem. So this is just a little sample I did for something. I think I was playing with this. This is the Fried Vevgarn yarn. But the hem on a small piece, it's challenging to get the hem square. Look how this sort of bends down at the edge. So with this little fringeless thing, they're perfectly square, which is delightful. Just something to play with. Also, the tapestry diary thing was a way to sort of mark events. And, it's like I'll go somewhere on a trip and I'll weave a couple things about what happened. So that's just a way to experiment with stuff. Those were all inspired by Susan Martin Maffei. Again, she's a big inspiration for us, I think. She did a travel series of little tiny tapestries as she rode the train across the country. And you can find those on her blog if you just Google Susan Martin Maffei and then look at her work. And then Tommy Scanlon is another mentor who's done a lot of tapestry diaries. So every year she does a tapestry diary. And so it's a fun thing to practice with and a good way to play with materials, which for me mostly has stuck with yarn. I have not tried dead leaves yet.
Well, but, that's only 30 years in,
Yeah, I'm not quite there yet, Sarah. But
I had a thought while you were saying that, just that how we often think, oh, well, I weave at home and I knit or something while I'm gone. It's hard to be away from my loom, but you have these great pictures of you weaving little 4 selvage tapestries in the car.
Yeah,
you're going places. And
I'm not driving though.
Yeah, well, I'm glad about that. But just thinking about it as this immediate thing, this response to where you are in this way that sketches almost. And to have these little sketches is kind of phenomenal in a woven structure, because we forget that. We think, oh, well, looms.
Right, big
place.
Yeah.
Stay, not
serious.
Looms. Not make bracelets and wear it on the way there.
Right, it's not serious. It's just like I'm playing with something and figuring stuff out while I play. And I have a whole little cabinet full of tapestries that are just experiments. And they can
one of your
live there.
classes is that, right? Don't you teach one of your retreats is about responding to the environment?
Oh yeah, I teach a retreat on little looms. That's exactly what that is. It's just, let's just take an example of a color or a form or something and make a little tapestry about it. So yeah.
We need to answer questions.
Yeah, we need to answer some questions before we run out of time. Linda actually said she's saving dryer lint in small Rolex and put it through her warp. So there you go, dryer lint.
Wow, that's fabulous.
Nice, Linda. So I'm going to go back up to the top a little bit. Yes, Nan, this will all be included in the Fringeless class. So, I mean, the recording will be. And then Gina wants to know if you knitted your sweater.
I did.
Isn't it awesome?
It's a, oh dear, now I'm suddenly going to blank on the kind of fleece that I got, that it was, but oh well, it begins with a C. It's one of the many fleeces that begin with a C, and it was wonderful to work with.
Susan asked what was the set on the 9x9. And I'm not sure what you mean, Susan. It must have been one that Sarah showed. Do you maybe she mean
the little 9x9 inch square ones I was doing? I think I wove almost all of those at 8 ends to the inch, probably maybe 8.5. Because pipe looms, there isn't any kind of a structure to define the set. I actually push it a little bit. So sometimes it's a little bit closer than 8, but maybe not exactly 9. But my guess is I was hovering around 8 because I was using weft that works best, 2 strands of hand spun together at 8.
Okay, cool. Susan asked, will you explain the twisted warp? That would be a good question for you, Miss Sarah. Twisted warp.
The twisted warp is what happens when you bring the actual warp that you're making, in fact, does a zigzag up and down through the body of the tapestry. And you cannot see it here exactly, but each one of these strands then is comprised of a loop. And the loop is in fact 2 strands of warp that are woven as one. And they tend to twist together. So you can see here, on all of these, you can see each strand that I'm weaving. If you look way at the bottom where I've just done this one piece, you can see they come in together at a triangle where the little loop's at the bottom of the warp, and then they twist all the way up. We take a lot of that twist out at the end when locking the tapestry in place, but it makes it really easy to treat these 2 warps as one. So it does influence the size warp you want to start with, which Rebecca talks a lot about in the class and can maybe address. But you don't want to start with a warp that you would normally use at 8 necessarily, because it will in fact be woven double, which means you have less space between the warps.
Right. So for the fringeless thing, you might consider using a thinner warp than you would normally use, is what Sarah's saying. That like if you normally use a 12/9 seam twine or something at 8 ends per inch, you might go down to 12/6 or like 26, just so it's thinner because it will be doubled. So cool. Okay. I hope that hit it, Susan. Can 4 selvage warp be done on a floor loom? Pamela asked.
Well, I never have, but you work on a floor loom, so back to you, Rebecca.
Okay, so my answer is going to be no. I just don't think there's a good way to set it up unless you use the floor loom somehow as just a frame. Like took all the harnesses off, and I just think it would be a sort of a disaster. Although I know Sarah has done 3 selvage warps on a backstrap loom, 3 selvage, 3-sided instead of 4.
Right. And also, actually, that's something I learned from Susan. And I think she and Archie, once they started the 4 selvage, started doing, if they did not do, I may be wrong about this, but I think for quite a while, they did everything 3 selvage, so that you don't get the doubled warp, but you get a clean bottom, and then you have an unlimited warp at the top. It's a whole nother thing, but it's similar to what I was doing on backstrap loom, which I actually explain in a little zine that I wrote that you can get or download. Either I have physical copies, but called Backstrap Dialogues, that I wrote last week about my backstrap experiments, many of which were in fact tapestry, because that was the point, was to weave tapestries on backstrap, and then I got distracted.
There's more loom questions. I knew there was going to be loom questions. So basically, I'm not sure Sarah might have said this while I was freaking out about not everybody being able to get onto the webinar. But you want a loom that has a tensioning ability. So you're going to put on a warp, and then the loom has to be able to extend because you're taking the jig out of it. So that's why something like a floor loom that's fairly complicated doesn't work very well. It's too hard to put the warp on. You probably could figure out how to do it, but I haven't. so Gina asked about, Mary asked about, can you do this on a Hoket loom? Which I just realized I have one of those right here. She's talking about a loom like this. It's a little eye-shaped loom where the warp goes back and forth, but there's no tension on that loom at all. I have seen people do it on that loom. There are magicians. And I also think that one of the joys of this kind of weaving is that you have a really long warp. And you can see on Sarah's loom behind her that the warp is open the whole way up, which makes a beautiful weaving experience. If you put a warp like this on a Hoket loom, you're going to have basically no shed. And in that case, you might as well use a Navajo loom, because on a Navajo loom is also for salvage, but you don't have any shed when you're weaving. So the advantage of the long loom is that it's fun to weave on.
Yeah. And I will say, having woven for more hours than I can possibly imagine, weaving is hard on your hands. It's interesting work, and it's less hard on my hands than many other things that I do, but my hands work hard. And if this gets too short, like I know some people don't really want to have a lot of space above the top. You think, oh, look, the tapestry is only this long. Why would I want all that? But the reason is for the ease of opening the shed. And your hands, my hands thank me. They can keep going. I have not worn them out yet. And I think a lot of it is because really paying attention to what's easiest and most comfortable for them to do. And if it's hard, A, I won't want to do it, and B, it'll hurt. So the extra distance is just pleasure, and because it all comes out anyway, it's not like it's waste. It's not like I'm cutting off runs.
Right, because she's going to use those supplemental warps again and again and again. So
I wind them on little bobbins and have them ready for next time I'm ready to work.
Yeah. So Gina asked about a rigid heddle loom, and I'd say the answer is the same as for a floor loom, that I think a rigid heddle with the two little beams on the end would be pretty hard to warp.
Somebody did do that. I did teach a workshop, and people did it on a rigid heddle. They just used it as a frame.
Oh, okay.
And we worked out a way to do it, and it was hard to get the tension enough, but it was physically possible if you just treat it as a tension frame. And I can't remember how we worked out to add tension, because of course a tension on a rigid heddle is from turning those bars.
Right.
But it may be, we worked out something and it kind of worked. And
you have to be creative, Gina.
Right.
So Mary asked an interesting question, just really quick. She was asking about adding harnesses on a pipe loom. And so I think what you're asking about, Mary, is shedding. Mm-hmm. And so I think on the loom Sarah has behind, she could add leashes if she wanted, but I think she just picks the shed. Is that right, Sarah?
Yep. Yeah, I have one open shed that's held open with this stick. I just have them propped there so they don't slide down. So you could, in fact, that's the open shed is there. And then I just finger pick the closed shed. And I started off when I started using pipe looms with making leashes, because my early work was all with treadles. And I thought, oh my God, I cannot live without treadles. So I had a Shannock loom for a time because it had treadles. And I thought it would be just too horrible not to. But then I started using pipe looms and making leashes, or even making string heddles, like with a Shannock, with a Murex. But then one day I was too lazy to make them. So I started finger picking, and the next thing I knew, I'd done 6 inches, and it was like, oh, okay. So that's what I do. But the Murex does have them, and you've done that.
Right. So this happens to be a little for salvage. I had on a Murex, which I haven't finished, but you can see that I have the shedding device set up on a Murex loom. So a Murex has those rotating shedding devices like the Hagen, and I've seen people make pipe looms like that. So there's an option there. Let's see. Here's maybe this question from Nancy will sort of lead us to the final talk about the bracelets, but she's asking about, for those of us who aren't artists, and any suggestions for how to carve out time to play and experiment to improve our weaving. Nancy.
That's an interesting question, because there's this sense that, well, it has to be important in some great way to carve out time. And my tapestry evolved in a very particular way because I learned right about the time my son was born. So my time was very limited, and all it took, well, it was still something, was the discipline to go to my loom when he fell asleep. as an infant. So for me, I had these teensy little windows while he was asleep. And I chose to weave instead of do the dishes because I figured I could do the dishes with him in a front pack or something, or I could just not do the dishes. And I think that's always been my choice, is when I have a window, I wove. But I also had this other job, which was being a mom. And so that gave me this kind of permission to do this other thing in my little windows. And then of course spin always, because I spun, and somehow spinning was easier to do when he was awake. But I have in the last, now my son isn't a grown up, and so I don't have any of those issues. I can weave all day long if I want. I can't necessarily physically do it though. But about 10 years ago, I started playing music as an adult beginner. And there was certainly no, like, this is important for you to do, Sarah, is play music. To start learning, you know, as a beginner musician especially, I was on a string instrument, you know, the intonation is, it was just painful for me, for everybody. So I would set out these little tiny bits of time which slowly have built up. And it's just, for me, it means I have to define it though. I have to say, the first thing in the morning, I will now come in, and 12 years on, I will come into my studio and I will practice for half an hour in the morning. And that's just, it's half an hour. That's all it is. That's all I'm doing. And then get on to the rest of my day. So in that sense, you could come to your loom. Okay, here's my half an hour. I'm just going to give this half hour. Otherwise, I might be on Instagram or something, you know, or Facebook. Or I don't do Facebook happily, but you know, and there's so many ways we could use up half an hour, and it could just be a defined half hour of warping the loom, or of picking some colors, or just one little tiny step. And it really, for me, it really helps to have that structure, because I'm a person of habit. And once I've established the habit, I can keep going. And I just really recommend giving yourself the joy of being a beginner and having it not matter, particularly other than that it's kind of fun.
I totally agree. I think that just try it, experiment. And I just had a conversation with another spinner, actually, Jillian Moreno, who I think she wrote a whole blog post about how she switched her practice in the evening. Like, her family watched television every evening. You know, they had an hour where they did some family thing where they were playing a game or watching TV or something. And she set up in their living room her own chair with her spinning stuff ready to go. And while she was interacting with her family, she would spin. And so finding that little space every day, whether it's like your own meditation morning weaving time, or the end of the day when your husband or wife or whoever watches CNN or something, something like that, I think is really helpful to find that kind of time. Yeah. So, okay. I want to answer Patricia's question before I forget. She asked, how do we get the video? And Patricia, everybody who registered will be getting a link to the recording. And also it will be on my YouTube channel, and it will be in the Fringeless course. So many places you can find it, and you can review it, because there's probably things you want to see, including Sarah's going to talk a little bit more about these bracelets, because she made a beautiful little instruction sheet about these, which is actually, now if you go and look, it's in the Fringeless class. So if you're in the class, you can see all her diagrams with particular instructions, but she's going to tell us a little bit more about how to weave these bracelets, which is, you know.
Again, it's that non-artist piece, that sort of, oh gosh, it has to be something special, or it has to have an image. I mean, people look at my work and often think, oh, well, gosh, it has to have a story. It has to have something in it to make it art, or to make it whatever it is. But I have to say, I learned to weave quite reluctantly, to weave tapestry reluctantly. I wanted to weave dish towels. I wanted to weave cloth. I was interested in the yarn. I came as a knitter. I love texture. So in that sense, the idea of my material immersion right now is a practice of responding to the materials. And these bracelets really delight me, because all it is in this sense is a long, narrow strip of tapestry. So you could do a little 4 selvage piece, in this case, 9 inches or 8 or 9 inches, which is the distance it would take. This one's going to be a bangle, so it's not going to have a button. And I'm just going to, the 2 ends, you weave a long strip, so the 2 ends together, and there you have it. And then the other one is a buttonhole. I weave a buttonhole in the end, and then sew a button on. I guess can you see the buttonhole? There we go.
I'm sorry, I'm trying to find the slide, and now I've messed it all up. So
So I also have pictures of this. I think I've blogged about it a little bit and may more later. But the basics, yeah. So there's a buttonhole that in this one that I'm wearing right now. It's you can see I did it in linen because I don't think the dead leaves are strong enough. I don't know that they can take the manipulation of buttoning and unbuttoning. I will find out. I'm going to try to wear these a bunch to see how they hold up. And I'm actually learning some interesting things about the dead leaves, which I'll talk about probably on my blog someday when I know a little bit more about them. But I feel like these are just a really delightful way both to practice for selvage warping. So you could put on a warp. It takes no time at all. Most of them are 12, maybe 14 warps ends. So they're 1.5 inches. Some of them as wide as 2 inches, but that's pretty wide actually. I think this one's 2 inches. All depends on the cuff that you like. Here I'm weaving 2 side by side. You can see the warps. There's actually going to be a gap in the middle. This one warp right here, I'm not going to weave. And the two, so this is one bracelet, which I sold. I went to a show and it was on my wrist and somebody bought it right off my wrist. So I can't show it to you in person, but, and then the one on the other side was this one, which I wove just next to it. And then I cut the warp in between and wove the ends in as per the 4 selvage technique. But the idea is it's super simple. There's almost nothing to it. It's completely about the materials. If you had a bit of yarn that you adored, you could just weave a strip of that yarn. And what might look like, well, that's not art. When you put it around your wrist, it is simply stunning. And you have a special button with some special yarn. It's really satisfying. I'm sort of embarrassed about how satisfying I'm finding making these little ones. So the one I'm doing now is actually going to have some tiny houses on it because, the tiny house.
Tiny houses.
And I do get entranced. And I'm also doing experiments with paper. And so this one's going to be all different kinds of the spun paper, which I'm, again, know very little about and I'm making up and I'm trying to get a little better at. But low stakes, seriously low stakes that are still really fun to have in your life.
So basically, you start at the bottom with a firm yarn and you weave in a slit for the button.
Yep.
You make sure you get it the right length to go around your wrist. You weave the rest of it. It's for selvage. It comes off. It's all done. You wrap it around your wrist and button it. And there you have it.
Done.
Okay.
You don't even have to, no frame. The frame is your arm or your friend's arm or your daughter's arm. I mean, Christmas presents. I hope no relatives are watching because you're all.
Susan says, yay, stash buster.
Yeah, it is perfect for little tiny bits. And actually this one I wove with, now, don't tell Rebecca, I used a bunch of knitting yarn. This is all very squishy, soft. It's everything she says not to use in tapestry, but it isn't itchy. So that's also important for the wrist.
True, that's true.
It is important to have, it's mostly Cormo, spindle spun Cormo. But see, I could practice letters, which nobody can even see all the letters at the same time. And if your selvages aren't even, you can't even see all the selvages at the same time. So
who cares? So Susan, and another Susan asked, how long is the bracelet on average?
Mine so far have been about 9 inches because that's the amount it takes to go over this part of this. And it also happens to be the jig that I have has an exact 9-inch position. If you show that wooden jig, you're kind of, if you're making a jig like this, you're a little bit stuck. But Rebecca, you put a warp on and made a strap jig.
Oh, right. I did. And that's, did I put that in my blog?
Or
I put it
something.
I put it on Instagram. I'll write a blog about it.
But so, and I'm actually, this one I have behind me is actually 8 inches, and I'm going to make it a bangle, not a cuff. So it may be a little snug. And also the 9 inches a little loose on my wrist. So if you don't like that, you might want to make it a little bit shorter, depending on the button and buttonhole thing. So 9 inches, depending on your hand and your wrist.
Okay. Awesome. Awesome. I'm going to go back to this, and this is part of, so Sarah did this beautiful instruction sheet, which is in the end of the Fringels class, and it's got her amazing drawings. If you didn't know, Sarah not only is an amazing knitter, tapestry weaver, but she also is a fantastic drawer of comics. So definitely that is a really fun bonus. This is the course art for Fringeless. So if you're looking for it on the Pathright site where all my online courses are hosted, this is what it looks like. And gosh, I just wanted to, before we wrap up, to say if you want to follow either of us, sign up for our newsletters. Sarah's website is afieldguidetoneedlework.com. So she has like a newsletter sign up on the right-hand side, right, Sarah?
Yep.
And so go there because her newsletters are so fabulous. They're awesome every time. She sends them, I think, every Tuesday.
I try, it ends up being every 2 weeks for the newsletter. And
okay. And the blog
subjected. The blog is every week, but I'm still working on it.
And you can find my newsletter at tapestryweaving.com, which is the same website. It's just easier to remember. And there's a let's chat or something button on the top right, and you can sign up there.
And you have nice handy pop-ups, which I haven't.
I do have pop-ups. So if you're new to my website, you'll get a pop-up that says sign up for my newsletter. So this is our other bonus, is that if you want to sign up for the class, use this code for a 10% discount. The code is for Salvage, and the capital letters do matter. And you can find out all about the class at RebeccaMezoff.com/fringeless. And it's just a really fun class where we go through step by step and we talk about how to do this. Sarah shows everything in great detail, and she also does a lot of troubleshooting. We had a bunch of questions from people, really specific troubleshooting questions, and they're really hard to show in this kind of format. So we want to have you go back to the class, ask those questions there. And then, like I said before, if we get a lot of questions about the same thing, we'll make another video about it. So there's always that. It's not a static thing. We want you to be part of the community and be able to participate with all of that. So I totally feel like I cut you off, Sarah. What else do we want to say? We are over our hour by a little bit, but what else do we need to fill in?
Thank you for coming, and I wish everybody who signed up could have been here, and hopefully you're getting to watch the recording of this.
Yes.
But each of you is part of this tapestry community, and it just warms our hearts how many people are interested and how much we'd like to connect with you. And so that's one of the reasons we made the class, in a way, because it's a place to go where there's a bunch of other people who are interested in this wacky way of working. And suddenly there could be just a whole bracelet thread, or and suddenly you could have friends. That's how Rebecca and I met, was online and through this kind of thing. So not only do we need to make a living so we can pay our computer bills and stuff, we also really love there to be more tapestry weavers and want them to connect with us and you to connect with each other and find each other. And so I'm just so happy that we had this moment to do it live and say, hey, it keeps happening.
That's right. So I agree. I second all of that. It's just so much fun to be able to talk to a bunch of people who have been playing with this. I actually put a bunch of pictures on my website under it's on the Fringeless page, of things that people have been making over the class opened in July. So since that time, all the amazing things that y'all have been making, not all of them, just some of them. The ones that I caught as they went by, I added. So I will put that code in the email that you get. So if you didn't write it down and you want it, I will put it there along with the link and the link to the replay. If there's stuff you want to revisit that we said, that will be great. And I also apologize to the people who were not able to get in on this. And I think that we might have to do this again, Sarah, because we disappointed a lot of people, I think.
Yeah, well, I so appreciate all the enthusiasm. So what can we do but be enthusiastic back?
That's right. That's right. So we'll try it again. And thank you so much for coming. Y'all are our biggest, I don't know, joy every day, just seeing what y'all are doing.
Yep. Weave on.
Weave on. Have a great week. And happy Thanksgiving if you're in the United States.
Right.
Okay.
Okay.
Bye-bye, y'all.